This is the Kakimori Brass Nib. I picked it up whilst I was in Japan, and it's definitely a bit different from a normal dip pen or a fountain pen. I've been curious to see how it performs and affects my line work within my art, so I thought I'd share my thoughts, see how it actually feels to use, and whether it's worth the price. I'll start with a quick unboxing, I'll look at the nib and holder, and then we're going to move on to some drawing and ink tests, as well as comparing it with some other options, before I end the video with a painting as I use this to draw a landscape. So this is how it comes packaged. This is what I bought at the Kakimori store. I will put some shots on screen because it's a beautiful store, really nicely laid out, pretty big as well, so it's in an old auto garage that they have converted in a really nice neighbourhood too. So you can see here that they do also specialise in inks and loads of different pens, but this is the nib that I was after. So in this one, which is a really clever design, this is a nib holder. So I got the Sakura wood, and I just picked that one because I thought it was really lovely. You can get the nib holders cheaper. You can buy them in hand and different stationery stores in Japan and elsewhere. But for me, I wanted this as a souvenir and a keepsake, so I decided to get it there. So it just comes like this, a really nice wood. It feels very smooth. I really like how this feels. It's quite weighty. And then this is the brass nib. So this is the one that I was after. You can get them in copper, stainless steel or brass. They are metal nibs. You can also get them in glass too actually. But I decided to do brass. I did quite a lot of research beforehand, and you can see here, this is how it's presented. It's actually much smaller than I expected. I did, like I said, do my research beforehand, but it's still smaller than I imagined, but really nice. It's kind of weighty, especially compared to other, standard nibs, because this is made from brass. It's got a very special design that I'm going to talk about and why I wanted to buy this nib in the first place. I do think this is going to be way more durable than some of the other pens that I've got. Now, I've been really interested in line work lately, so I feel like this is a great addition to my collection, and I will be doing some comparison and dipping it in ink and doing some line tests alongside my other pens. So I'll show some close-ups here, but you can see it comes to a really fine point. It is actually quite heavy. The more that I hold it, the more I'm noticing that weight, which I think is really nice. It makes it feel very special. Now, this is a pricey nib, so the reason why I hadn't bought it in the few years that I've known about it and been interested in it is because of the price. So here in the UK, I've seen it on the Journal shop, and you can buy it for £49 just for this nib, so not including the holder or anything else. So £49 just for this, which was quite steep, and I really wasn't sure about spending that money. So instead I bought a ticket to Japan and bought it there. But I was planning on going to Japan anyway, and they do have a store there like I showed you. So I do have my receipt here. So the metal nib, the brass one, was 4,950 yen. The nib holder, the Sakura wood, was 2,970, and I also bought a postcard and the bag. So as of today, that equates to £23.47 for this. So just over half price than the £49 I would have paid if I'd bought this here in the UK. So definitely worth getting it out there when I was visiting. So I'm really pleased about that. But it's definitely pricey, much pricier than other fountain pens and standard nibs. So let's pop this in the holder, and then I'll talk a little bit about the other pens that I've got, and we'll do some tests and then some comparisons. Okay, that slots in really nicely, very sturdy fit as well, so it doesn't feel like it's going to fall out. Feels very nice, quite a weighty pen, especially up this end. It's very heavy up here, obviously, where the nib is. It's going to be interesting to write with. It definitely feels quite fancy. Obviously, it is a higher end product, so I'm looking forward to trying this out. Okay, so I will be doing some tests just in my Strathmore Sketchbook. So I'm going to do my nib tests and comparisons over here, and then I'll do a painting at the end in watercolour and using this for my line work at the end of the video. Okay, so I've got two different inks here. I've got just a Winsor & Newton calligraphy ink for fountain and dip pens, and I've also got the Atramentis document ink in black. This is my absolute favourite ink. This one is waterproof, this one is not. I love this waterproof ink in my fountain pens. It's the only one I've ever found that doesn't clog my pen. So waterproof ink is very well known for clogging. I've used a sketch ink before, and I did find that it clogged up the nibs of my fountain pens, whereas this one hasn't. No matter how long I leave it, even if I've left it for a few weeks, I find it hasn't clogged the nib. So I really recommend this ink. I've got this in black and sepia brown. in my two Fude De Mannen pens, and I'll talk about those a little bit later, but I will just be using the calligraphy ink. I've got this bottle here, and because I know I'm not going over it for now with my watercolour paints or anything, it doesn't need to be waterproof, so I'll be testing it with this. Okay, so this nib has some grooves along the side, so the ink will sit into these little grooves and then flow down. So you shouldn't need to dip it into the ink as often as other dip pens. So we're going to test that out with the other one I've got to play with. But for now, let's see how this feels and how this writes. Okay, so I'm just going to go right in. Oh yeah, you can see, I don't know how far in to dip it. You can see there how it is clinging into those grooves. You can really see that up close. So it's all disappeared into those lines now. So let's give it a go. Okay, so it's a bit rougher than I thought. I know, having looked up online, the steel is a little bit more scratchier. This isn't super duper smooth, that's probably because of my paper, but the line quality is really nice. So I'm just using this as I would a standard pen, at a slight angle there. But the beauty of this pen is that if you change the angle that you're drawing at or writing at, you can get a much thicker line. So if I hold this straight up, oh wow, that's really, really thin. I like that. So very thin there. And then we'll take a bit of getting used to. Oh yeah, oh wow, okay. That is so nice. So I'm not on super smooth paper, so you can see a little bit where the texture of the paper is showing. But that is really nice. So often with dip pens, it depends how hard you are pushing, whereas with this one, it's the angle that you're doing it at. Let's see how thick and thin I can get these lines. Wow, okay, it's coming out quite wet as well, which is really cool. I think this is going to be so fun for creating art. So it really does depend on the angle that you hold it. There's still a really good amount of control here. There's still a good amount of feedback from the paper as well, which is really nice. And not even thinking about re-dipping it yet. It still feels like there's plenty of ink here. See just how thick I can get it. Okay, so here at some angles I'm getting a little bit of the ink not coming out. But you can see there all these different lines from this one nib. Wow. So I'm just angling further and further up here to get the thinner lines. So you don't get the flexibility of a traditional nib. Instead, you change the angle to get that variation, which can take a little bit of getting used to. It reminds me a little bit of the Sailor Fude De Mannen pens because of the angles on those nibs. But that's really cool. I don't know that I'd go like super thin and thick between my drawings, but we'll do a little test of that. I feel like we're running out a little bit, but then when it runs out, I can just turn it to get to another sort of bit of ink on this nib. So you can see here where it's gone slightly lighter and grey. I just turned it and I got this super black ink there. So that's where it's a little bit greyer. And if I turn it, yeah, I can get more ink. So that's really interesting. Let's do a quick little doodle, see how I would just naturally draw and how much variation I can get from that. So I'm going to dip again. And I'll just draw, I've got some daffodils in a vase in front of me, so I'm just going to draw that. Okay, so this is just normal without kind of trying to get that variation. So I can still see some of the ink pooling in some areas, so it's getting a little bit thicker without me trying. It feels really nice. It's nice and smooth with the ink coming out. I'm not having to force anything out there. It's not super scratchy as well. I have used some other nibs before that are way too scratchy for me. So I do like the way that this feels. It's still got that feedback, so it's not just like gliding on the page. I can still feel the tooth. So now I've got a little bit of variation there, a little bit of a thicker line down here. But what happens now if I purposefully try and get some really thick and thin lines in my drawing? So let's draw that again. And I'm going to try and vary my angle. So let's see. It's a little bit of a different way for working because I usually just do it as is. But because I do want to get that variation, it does kind of make you a little bit more mindful of where you're placing your lines. Oh, I love that. Can you see there where I've got that thick line versus that thin one? So that will be good for, especially for like distance, if I wanted to show that. I could do thicker lines in the foreground, thinner ones closer up. I can see this working really well for hatching. Oh, I went thick there, unintentionally, but I like that. I love it when that happens. So I'm going thin and thick here and trying to purposefully change. And this feels more exciting to me than the other one, simply because of that variation. Can you see how there's just more energy in the lines? And I think that comes really easily with this pen because of that line variation. It makes me feel a bit more playful as well. Okay, so this is how my sketchbook spread is looking. So you can see the difference there. I'm going to do some close-ups on those. But there is a big difference between the left and the right, and I'm much happier with this one, where I've got those thick and thin lines. Now, I don't know how often you would need to fill this up, because I'm really impressed with how much I haven't had to go back to dip in my inkwell. Now, obviously, if you're using it like this, you're going to use a lot more ink, but I'm just going to do this for a while, just to see, so we can compare. I like that. It feels so nice. I can see why they are so popular. I'm going to have a lot of fun playing with this. I think it does take a little bit of getting used to because I'm so used to using the pressure. I think using the Sailor Fude pens have helped me kind of get used to this already. But I haven't even had to think about, I mean, you can see here where it's dried. It's getting a little bit more grey. That's because of the ink itself. So that bit has gone dry. So let's just turn it. Yeah. Okay, maybe we're running out. I keep turning it and then finding a bit more ink. See there? So a little bit of trial and error. Let's just do some writing as well. Okay, so here, right on the end of the nib is quite dry. So all of the ink feels like it's in the lines. If I redip the nib and try that again. Yeah, okay. So if you are using the very tip, it's better when you have just dipped it in, I reckon. I'm definitely going to be using this for art rather than writing. I prefer to use fountain pens for my writing so I don't have to keep dipping. But there's definitely a romanticism there. This feels really nice. If you did just want to use it at the normal pen angle, then it feels very natural to do so. So yeah, I think we were getting a little bit dry here, but I'm impressed with how much ink you can get. So I'm just going to rinse this. I just dip it in my water pot. I don't want the ink to dry within these inkwells because then that would completely, like if they get blocked up, then what's the point? And I haven't done much research in that, so feel free to share down below on how to clean these dip pens. But here, for now, I've just dipped it in the water and I'm just going to clean it off. Yeah, perfect. It's cleaned really nicely. So now let's compare it to a regular dip pen. So I've got this one here. This is a Brass Steno number 361. It's commonly known as a blue pumpkin nib. So you can see here, it looks very fancy. It's very reasonably priced. I can get this in the UK for about £2.50. So with this one, we're just going to dip it in the exact same ink and see how this one feels. Okay, so this one is definitely scratchier. You can probably hear that. And this one is where you press harder to get those line variations. So I'm pressing light and then I'll press really hard. It does feel a little bit fragile, like I'm scared if I press too hard I might break it or bend it. And I definitely can't get the thickness that I can get with the other ones. This is just a standard nib. You can obviously get other ones with the flatter tips. And if I press hard enough, you can get that dual line. Now I'm already running out of ink. So that's a really good test because I'm already needing to dip it back into that ink. Whereas before we got quite a lot. So I'm just going to re-dip in And then over here, I'll do what I've done above. So this definitely sounds a lot scratchier. Just my usual standard pressing is thinner than with the Kakimori. That's because of the general angle that I do hold my pen. So let's do some thicker. It doesn't feel like it's flowing as nicely. Definitely feels like I'm getting way more scratchiness. And we are starting to run out here. Yeah, so I think we're out now. So I would need to dip it again. Whereas up here, we got a lot more ink down without having to re-dip it. And that's because of those grooves in the side, which is really, really clever. I think it's a really smart little invention. And I much prefer the feeling of the Kakimori nib to this one, which definitely feels scratchier and a bit more fragile, obviously because of the way this nib is designed. Okay, so the other ones that I want to test is my fountain pen. Now, obviously, this is very different to a dip pen because we've got a cartridge in there already. Now, this is my Sailor Fude De Mannen. I use this quite a lot. I really enjoy using these for my line work. If I'm doing line work, I'll generally reach for these. So I've got this one, which is a 55-degree nib. So you can see here that it's got this angle right at the tip, so it's not like a usual fountain pen because I can get that line variation. So this one is 55 degrees. I've got a Sailor converter in here, so I don't use the Sailor cartridges because they're not waterproof ink. I've bought a converter which I then put my Atramentis document ink in. Now I also have this one which is also a Sailor Fude De Mannen, but the angle is slightly different, so this one is 40 degrees. So you can see it's not quite as severe if I do a comparison against the other one. Very similar in design, but the pink one I've got brown ink in, so the sepia brown, so I tend to just swap and change depending on the colour. But if you are a beginner, I would recommend the 41, just because it's slightly less severe and I feel like it's easier to use to get used to, you know, that angle. So really love these. They are my go-to when I do want to add in line work. So let's do just some comparison here and I'll fill out my last corner of this sketchbook page with some tests with this Sailor Fude De Mannen. So I think this will be similar. So I'm a little bit more used to using this one than I have just getting the Kakimori out of the box. But again, it's quite similar in terms of the thickness. Actually, it's not as thick. Just looking up at my other tests, it's not quite as thick, but you can see here, again, we get that variation, which is why I love these pens. If I turn it over, we get even thinner. So it's similar in terms of the variation you can get of very thick to thin, but if you want even thicker, the Kakimori can definitely do that. It feels quite natural for me, but you can see sometimes it does skip, but I don't mind that. I really like the roughness, and these are quite easy to get in the UK. It's definitely not quite as smooth. You can see where the ink is skipping a little bit more just because of the way this pen is compared to the Kakimori. You can see there's a bit more texture within those lines. And then if I do the test like this, I don't feel like it's quite as intuitive to change the angle for this as it is on the Kakimori Brass Nib. You can still get it, but it just feels a little bit more clunky just changing that angle at the time because of the way this is just the bent nib at the end versus that very smooth shape on the Kakimori. Now with this one, I definitely don't need to keep dipping because the ink is inside, and I find that really helpful when I am just drawing. Now I forgot to do a writing test with that blue pumpkin, so let's do that now. So this is the... Oh, you can really hear that scratchiness. This doesn't feel as nice at all than the other two. And let's do the same with that tiny gap I've got with the Sailor Fude De Mannen. Yeah, you can definitely see a bit more texture. And I'm just right here, so I'm not quite as neat. But absolutely fine in terms of writing. I do journal with this pen in my sketchbook. You can see there's a little bit more variation just where I'm writing, not intentionally trying to get that variation. Okay, so we've done some tests here. Before I start comparing these pens, I'm going to put on screen a painting that I'm going to do over here, just using the Kakimori dip pen and then my watercolours on top. Okay, so those were the 3 pens that I have tested out. So we've got my least favourite, which is the blue Pumpkin Nib. I think that's fine for playing around with dip pens, but now I've used the other ones, I definitely find it just feels a bit fragile. I don't like the scratchiness, and it feels like there's a lot of tension between the paper and pen where it is scratching, and I don't think it's as nice, especially to draw with. I don't think it's as nice of an experience as the other ones. So with these two, these are obviously my favourites. I have been using the Sailor Fude De Mannen for multiple years now, I think coming up to 2 or 3 years, and I still really love it. I think it's really helpful to just have this one in my bag. I have drawn out and about with this one, and this one, the Kakimori, just isn't suitable for plein air. I know you can take this out with a bottle of ink, but I probably won't do that. I've done it in the forest before with a dip pen, but it's not very practical. So for me, this is going to be a studio pen, and this one would be one that I take plein air. For the price point, I can see why it is so expensive. I can see that there's been a lot of love put into this design. But if you are looking for this thick and thin variation, I think the Sailor is your best bet. I think this is a really affordable way to have that with the ease of it being in an ink cartridge. You can get these on Cult pens, the Sailor Fude De Mannen pens, for £16.50. I did buy the converter as well though, so if you want to use waterproof ink, you would have to factor that into your cost. And they are £7, also on Cult pens. So definitely worth factoring that in. That would be what, £22? Not including the postage for this, if you did want to swap out the cartridges. And then this one I paid £23.50 for in Japan, but it would have been £49 here, plus whatever you pay for the nib holder. So it's definitely not a cheap option. It's definitely up there in terms of art supplies. Definitely feels a bit more specialist. If you do a lot of line work in your art, I think it's really fun to play with, and I do really love the variation I can get. I don't know how often I'll use it this thick though, so I'll probably end up using it more like this, where we've got that lesser of that variation. And I do love the effect, so it's very charming for me to just dip this into ink pen. It feels very romantic, like I said, and I think I will use this a lot in the studio. So yeah, it's not perfect. I think there is definitely a learning curve, especially with controlling that line variation. But it felt more natural to do it with this one, just because of the design, compared to just the bent nib on the Sailor Fude De Mannen. So if you like experimenting with your drawing tools or want something a bit more expressive, then I definitely think it's worth trying out. It depends on your budget, of course. I think it is steep. It's not a cheap art supply, but I really have enjoyed using it. It feels very smooth, and I'm going to get a lot of use out of this one. I'm really glad I did buy it. I'm excited that I bought it in Japan as well. That was a really lovely experience, but I hope this video has been helpful. If you just write, I don't think it's worth it. I think it's mostly for that line variation in drawing that I'm excited to use it for. But if you do use this just for writing, let me know what you think down below or how you get on. Maybe you prefer to use the Sailor Fude De Mannens. They are definitely more affordable, probably not as easy to use in terms of that angle. So I found that it took quite a lot of getting used to when I started using the Sailor Fude De Mannens. But now I feel a lot more confident with that, and maybe that will come with me using the Kakimori more as well. But certainly on my very first few tests, it just felt a little bit easier to control that angle and get that variation. I'm really excited to use this more in my sketchbook, so you'll probably see more artwork created by this over on my Instagram, and let me know if you have any questions too. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've got one or if you've been interested in buying one, and hopefully this video has been helpful. I'm going to leave you with some more of my drawing here. I've had a lot of fun experimenting. It's really nice to use some of my Japan art supplies after my big haul last week, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a creative week ahead, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!